So today we're starting with the forms. We're going back to the forms. So we did this basic form. So this was basically managing the form and also kind of testing it out and having it so that you don't have to submit it on an API. I think Mohammed, you're not muted, or someone is not muted. Okay, so we're gonna start with the advanced form today. That's where we're gonna go. Let me change this to, okay, that's better. So we're gonna start with the advanced form today. So the advanced form today, we're gonna talk about controlling the form. We did talk about this before on the last lesson. We're going to talk about form inputs, for example, a little bit more advanced, like checkbox and dropdown. Most of you did the dropdown in the assignment, but we're going to do checkbox. So that's what we're going to do. And also we're going to validate the inputs so that when people try to put in something, we can validate it whatever way we want. We could give it a limit of characters. We could make it required. We could, add different things. And also we need to make a post request. Remember when we were learning Axios, you guys were doing get request. So now we're gonna learn post request, which is sending the data from the form to an API. So we're gonna do that, but we're gonna send it to an API, test API, and you're gonna see how that is handled. Okay. So we can go over what we did last time quickly. We have this assignment, not assignment, this lesson. Let me just under it. We have this. Basically, this is similar to what you did. We have a volunteer form. And this volunteer form is, we have a state here. We have initial state. Initial state is just an empty state. So it has just the empty information. It's the same as having this object inside here. And then we stated, we created a state and then we set up the inputs. That's it. We don't even have the functionality or anything. So it will not work now. It will not do anything. So we have all these inputs. We're gonna add more inputs. There's 1 or 2 inputs I think missing. So we're gonna add that. So let's add those inputs for now. And you guys know this, how to do this. So we're not gonna explain it in detail. Let's see, so there is, we have the motivation. So let's add the checkbox. There's checkbox missing. So the checkbox, we have to add the label. For the label, we're just gonna use the same label as these. So we're gonna say label. And as you notice here, the label is different here. We're creating the label at the top and then we're closing it at the bottom. So that's also something to be noticed. Okay, so label. And we could add the HTML4 here if we want. HTML4 equal to, we're gonna call this, actually we're gonna add the dropdown first. Let's add the dropdown first. So we're gonna call this positions. Right now we're creating a volunteer form. So you need a position for the person to volunteer. So in here, we're gonna add the form. So we're gonna use a selection, but before we do this, let's add a text here. What would you like help with? All right, and we could close the label here, so I can show. So this is the label right here. For now, we're just going to create a basic select. So you guys did, most of you did the select. So select, we could have an ID of position. This ID is connected to this, the HTML4. So positions. We also need a name called positions. It has to be same as the state. So the name here has to be same as here as the state. Okay, so let's close that. We're gonna add the functionality on change, all that stuff later. So here, select. Select needs a options. So let's add few options here. I'm gonna copy the options so I don't have to keep writing them down. So a couple of options here. So these options are basically they have a value, and this is the value we're gonna target when we're changing the option. So this value says newsletter, yard work, admin work, tabling, and it has to match here. So when you look at the dropdown, you see here. Okay, so this is how selection looks like. You could start with the first one, and you could leave it without any values, and this would be the one that shows here, the first one. And that if you select that one, that means there's no value. All right, so if we, okay, let's also add a checkbox. So a basic checkbox. So to add a checkbox, first we need to create the label, of course. So let's create the label. Okay, and then we can add the HTML4 here. It's equal to, let's call it terms. So this would be the agreeing on terms of use and whatever, something like that. I'm gonna add a class name here called terms that I already created in the CSS. So I already set it up the CSS here. And inside here, inside the label, we're gonna create an input. So a basic input. So this input will have a type of checkbox. It will have a name, of course, of terms. And so that those are the two main things to start with, and then we can add more. So as you can see here, it shows the checkbox, but this checkbox, it needs a name, so we have to add a name. So I'm gonna call it terms and conditions. So you see here, it says terms and conditions. So that's how we set it up. This is kind of like what we learned last time. Most of it, except the drop down and the checkbox. So now we can set up the state and hook it up, and also write down the functionality for the functions that we need. So this would be form state. Okay, and this is the initial state. All right. Any questions so far of anything? Anything confusing you? Anything that you like? Any clarification?
For the level, is required to have like ID, and what was the other one? I see another one.
HTML4.
No, if you go down the level, like still keep going. Yeah, but I see name and ID for the select.
For select, yeah. So select is same as the input. You could have an ID if you want. The reason why we have an ID is this HTML4. So this is basically saying this label belongs to this selection. So that we're kind of like connecting. It's two things connecting. We could leave the ID. We don't even need it, but we have to delete this too. It will be no use if you don't have the ID, but still it will work. It will work fine, like normal. But it's for best practices. So in the future, if you're building a bigger application, you will see that you will need it if you have a lot of forms, a lot of inputs. Okay. Any other question about the forms before we get more complicated? All right. So you guys learned this before. So let's set up the handle change. Okay, so let's set up the handle change. Let's say const handle change. Hopefully that's Australian handle change. Okay. What do we need in the handle change as a parameter?
Event.
Event, and you can name whatever you want here, but you need one parameter, or action. What you can name whatever here. I missed the arrow function here. Okay, so in the handle change, what do we start with? What is the main thing that we need in the handle change? What is the main thing? What is it doing actually? What is handle change doing?
It's just gathering the information, the input information.
So it's gathering the inputs. That's right. So every time you write a name, it will collect that. And then you write an email, it will collect, it will keep track of that. It will set that to the state. So it will give it to the state so that the state can keep track of what's happening in the form. So to do that, we need a variable to collect that. So we'll call this input data. So this one in here, we need, of course, to first copy the state. So how do we copy the state? Where do we start?
We're gonna use this spread operator. So you're gonna open curly brackets,
Okay.
and then and then get the state, which is form state.
Form state. Yep. So we're gonna get the state first, and the next thing would be basically targeting the inputs, right? So using event.target to target the name. So we have to give the name. We have to put it inside an array. So we say event.target.name, and this will be a key for, like, in this is an object. So the key would be that, and the value would be what would be the value? What do you think? So we have the name here, and remember we're gonna add a value here too. So we're gonna add a value. So this would be the value. It would be the form state dot. This would be dot name. Okay, so that would be the name. So here we need to add event dot target dot value, and we will modify this in a little bit, because we will need to check also the checkbox here, because I mean this checkbox. This checkbox is not a input. So I mean it is an input, but it is a little bit different. So let's give these inputs a value, and also let's give it the on change here. The on change will be the handle change. Okay, so and this one will be the same. The value would be form state dot value dot email, and also you're gonna have the on change, and that will be the handle change. And also we're gonna have all of them like this. So I'm gonna copy the on change and add all of them. So this will go here, and this will go right here, and here too. Not in the label, it's gonna go to the input. Okay, and then they all need a value. So let's add that. So this would be value form state dot this would be motivation. So you're just looking at the name of that, and then saying form state dot motivation. And here we need a value too. This would be form state dot positions. Okay. What about this one, the checkbox? What do we say here as a value?
You're gonna
remember that the checkbox doesn't have a value. So it is just a checkbox. Because these have a value of text, this has a value of drop down, but the checkbox is different. So in HTML, think of HTML. What is the property for this for the checkbox? What is the condition when you check this checkbox? What happens in HTML? You're going to have a
Like true or false, something like that.
True or false. Yep, we're gonna use true or false, but to start with, we need to check the we need to make sure that the box is either checked or not checked. So to do that, we're gonna use the HTML. So if you say input HTML checked,
Or unchecked, something like that.
yeah, it has an attribute called checked. So where is it? So this is not this one, not the checkbox. Checked property. There's a property in the form where when you declare that property, it shows you make sure that sorry about that. You make sure it is checked. So let's go back to here. So what you could do is the property would be the attribute would be checked. So if you want to make sure this is checked or not checked, you could say equal to, we could say equal to, and then we're going to use the form state. So form state that we could say terms. So if we go up here, this is the terms, but we have to change it from here because this one is just a value. It's either true or false, but we have to change it from here. This will handle all other inputs with a value, but it will not handle the one with the just checked here. So now if we save this and we type something here, cannot type because we have not we haven't sent it to the state. So we're going to say set form state and then input data. Okay, save that. So that will work. And this one we checked, see, it will not uncheck. So that we have to change that. To change that, we can change it from here. So we could add more information here so that it makes sure that when we check, it checks. When we uncheck, it unchecks. So to do that, we have to modify a little bit. Okay. So to modify it, wait a second, my screen is shutting down or something. Okay. So we have to use here. We have to use the ternary operator. Basically, we have to say if the type, which is here, this type, if the type is text, then if the type is checkbox, because this one the type is different. This one the type is checkbox. If the type is checkbox, then we will say basically make it checked or not checked. If not, then we will just say it's a value. It has a value, so just change the value. So let's do that. So in here, we're going to move it to a new line here. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to right here, we're going to have event.target.type. So let's get rid of this first. Event.target.type, which is each input has a type. If that type is equal to 3 equals checkbox, if it's equal to checkbox, then we will say, we'll use the ternary operator. We'll say that would be event.target.checked. Okay, so that means if that's the case, then then we're going to use the checked. So we're going to check, we're going to use the checked, which is right here at the bottom, right here. This is the checked. So that would be, this is our state, and it's going to check this instead of a value. There's no value in here. Otherwise, which is internal operator, you say otherwise like that. Otherwise, it would be event.target.value. Okay. I'm sure this is a little confusing because the one we had before was also confusing, and this one is a little bit more confusing. But think of this as just a, we could also create a new input for a new data for the checkbox, but we want to keep everything in one object. So here we're saying check the name, and then when you check the name, if the type is equal to checkbox, which is the last one, this one, if it's equal to checkbox, then we will say use this method, which will either check it or uncheck it. Otherwise, just render the value. So right here, so if we save this, we could uncheck it now, check it, uncheck it, and then we could send this data to the state. So actually, let's console log it before we do that. Console log input data. Okay, and if we look at that, let's open this in a new tab, new browser. Go here, clear this. Let's just say show information. So if we check this terms, you will see that here it says the terms is true. If we uncheck it, it says false. See? So that kind of flips back and forth. If we fill out this and say Mohammed, see, fills it out. This one will be email, Mohammed at gmail.com, motivation. So this would be, I would like clean, and you could choose here something else. See here. So this is the whole object right here, the last part. I mean, the last changes we made. So any question about this part? What is it doing here? Or any other parts? And I understand it's kind of confusing because it was already complex, but now we added the checkbox, and that's also confusing things. But keep in mind that we're just doing the same thing we did before. We're just saying if the type is checkbox, then do this. Otherwise, just do what we were doing before, which was just checking the value, right? Hopefully that makes sense.
Mohammed.
So
I see the part where it's just like, if the type is just like the checkbox, what is the other part, the opposite, like? What is, if it's not going to check?
So if it's checked, so if the type is checked, which is this, so the only input that will match would be this input. So other inputs don't have the type checked. So this doesn't have a type. This has a type of, this doesn't have a type. This has a type of text. So when we reach here, then we're saying, okay, then basically use the checked, which is here instead of a name. See this one, I mean value. So this one we're checking the value. So this one we're checking the value here. Instead of checking the value, if the type is checked, check the where it says checked. So you could name here whatever you want. I think. Let me remember. So we could say is checked. Here is checked. So let's see if this works. Okay, so if we check it and check it, it still works fine. So this basically is, it's basically checking the state of the condition. Is it true or false? Is it true or false? That's what it's checking. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's much better.
Okay. All right. So now we have the form. We have the handle change. We need the handle submit, of course. So let's do the handle submit. Let's just say, okay. One last thing before we move on from the handle change is we need to add one more thing. Let's add one more thing. Give me a second. One more thing that we haven't learned before. And that would be, we need to add something called persistent. Persistent. So right here, before we do all this, we need to add event that persistent. So we can go ahead and look for that and see what that does. So let's see, handle change, persist. So persist, handle change persist is a, let's see. So what this does, I wrote a note, necessary because we're passing. So what this does is we're going to be passing all this information to an API, to basically a database. So the note I wrote down was necessary because we're passing the event asynchronously, and we need it to exist even after this function completes, which will complete before. So so here, this will keep the data. Basically, it will persist the data. It means after we're done with this function, and we wrote down the information here, then it will keep the data. So even if you refresh it, it will keep track. I'm not sure if it's going to do right now. Maybe you have to add the database, but we can't submit anything right now anyways. We don't have to handle submit. So let's create the handle submit, and then we'll see if that works. All right, so handle submit. Wrote down a lot of notes. Okay. Form submit. So the handle submit. Okay, so let's write it down here. Let's write down handle submit. We'll need the event, and here will be handle submit. So you guys getting used to the handle change and handle submit. So we're gonna, this is basically usually how you change a little bit here and there, but mostly this is how you handle a form. So what was the first thing that we need in the handle submit? Who remembers? Remember when we hit here submit, it refreshes the page. How do we stop that?
Oh, prevent default.
Yep, so we say prevent default here, so that it stops from refreshing. So every time we refresh, it stops. And here we're gonna add the on submit, just right now. On submit, that will be handle submit, and we need that. Okay, so save that. Now, if we try to submit it, it will not do anything. So we have errors here. So the handle submit. Okay, so the handle submit. The issue with the thing about the handle submit is we have to send the data to an API. We're not sending the data to the front end, or here we're not sending it to anywhere. We're sending it to an API. So we need to set up that API, which is a post request API. So we need to grab Axios. So let's grab Axios. Okay. And then we need to import it, of course. Import Axios from Axios. Okay. So now inside the handle submit, we need to just set up the Axios. We're going to be using a database or a website called RecRes. So RecRes. So this is a fake API post request. So you can send something to it and then it will respond. It will give you back your data basically. So it's pretty nice. So go back here. So we're gonna say Axios.post. Remember we're using post here. Axios.post. Post is to send something to a database. So this is how you send it. And then we're gonna check the API. So this would be the API rec. Let me just copy it instead of misspelling it. So to send something to an API, you need the URL, you need the API itself, and then you need the data. So those are two things you need. So post will take two things. It will take the API and then comma the data. So this would be, the data will be of course our state because we're sending that object. So it'll be form state, right? And then of course this is asynchronous, so we have to say that then. So what happens after we send the post? Then we have to have an API. We have to handle that. So we can say response here or res. And then here we're gonna say so res. Okay. So that'll be a callback function. So this callback function, I think I've misspelled it. Okay, yeah, we're missing something here. So we're gonna say here. So here is where we're just gonna console log the res, which is the data, but we also need to handle. Yep, we're missing one more thing here. Yeah. So let's keep it simple. This is the that then. We have to add the that catch, but let's just keep it simple and have the that then. So now we need to see if this works, if we can console log the data. If the data is getting console logged. So save it, refresh. Muhammad, persistent. So that's not function. What happened? This is spelling. Okay, I think I misspelled it. Persist. Let me just grab it. Probably misspelling. Yeah. So let's go back one more time. All right. Let's say Muhammad at gmail.com. I'll help clean. Here we got work, terms, and submit. So let's see, this is the moment of truth. All right. Okay, so we sent the data and we something returned from that API. If you see 200 or 201 or something like that, it means it's good. So 200, anything 200 is good. So we have a lot of data here. Remember how we looked at other databases, or I mean other APIs, they will give you a lot of things like config and header and things like that. All you have to do is just look for what you need. Now we need this data. As you can see here, they even gave us something that we didn't ask for, which is the time it was created. They give us an ID. So did we even add ID here? Yeah, we didn't have any ID. So they gave us a random ID, motivation, name, position. So everything seems to be working. So now you could actually just, change this to your own API and then send information to the database. This is how usually it works when it comes to like creating a application. So let's add the catch before we forget. catch, and it's just error. And then we're just gonna console log the error. So we're gonna say here, it's gonna be, what's the log error? Them spelled here. Catch. So this catch, we're gonna be adding other things to it, but yeah, I forgot the, yeah. Yep, there's a function. So we're gonna keep it simple like that. Now, everything's working fine. Everything is working fine, but the form is not validated. So now if we put like, if we leave this checkbox, we could do that if we want. Of course, this email thing will not allow us because of HTML, but we could leave other things and it's still submit it, and it will still receive the data right here. And also some of the inputs are empty. We want to make sure, like, we want to force people to submit stuff and things like that. To do that, we can use a library called WEB. So a library called WEB, npm. So this package is really useful. It could be overkill. It could be something that, you know, we don't have to use right now, but it will help you in the future when you build in a bigger application. So let me double check everything is working. Another thing is every time we submit, we want to clear up the state. We want to clear up the form. To do that, we could just, okay, let's see. We can go here, sorry about that. Go here and say set form state and set it to the initial state, which is this. So initial state is basically an empty input. Okay. So now if we submit it, it's empty, it gets emptied. All right, so that's all good. So the next thing is the validation, as I said. So the validation is a little bit more complex. So let's take a quick break and then come back and then handle the validation, inshallah. And before I actually go to the break, any question about this, the API call and what's happening?
Man,
Yeah.
When we say like access.post and now you send in a data and then you getting something, right?
Yes.
So when you need to put out something, you put like after the done, where you put the console log, you put sometimes like return. Is that possible?
Here you want to put return here like this?
Yeah, can you do that? Or
so that then is, it has a function inside it. So this is a, yeah. So you can put that return here if you want, but most of the time you don't need to put a return, because every time when you put a return, it means anything after the return will not be returned. It will not show. So you could say return res. You could say that if you want, and then you could access this outside of this function, the rest.
okay.
But
What about
yeah.
Well, okay, I get that. What about the HTTP? Is that most of the time you copy from somewhere, or sometimes you have your own data and put it there?
Here, this HTTPS.
Yeah.
So this one, yeah, I copied from somewhere. So this website, REC has API for us. You see this API, and you can go to their documentation. They'll give you more information about it. This is the API. So, but if you're building your own, then later when you guys go to the backend on Node, you're gonna build an API where you accept the data, right? Where you accept the data, and then you're gonna put that API here instead of this. And the API will be a URL or something like that. It will be something like localhost. It will be like something like HTTPS localhost 5000 / maybe like posts, something like that. So you'll create an API like that, which will accept a data, and then you could submit that data to the database, to something like MySQL database or something like that. But for now, we're just testing things. So we're using a already made API for us, where we can submit stuff to, and it will return stuff for us. So it returned this REST for us. Now we could, put this REST or this data to a state here, and then show it somewhere. So like maybe underneath the form or something like that. We could do that too, which we did before when we were doing last time, but I'm trying to keep it simple this time.
So basically, we all these things we're learning is just like either the handle change or the handle submit, those two.
Yeah, so when it comes to forms, you need these two. So, and also what's inside it might change. So what's inside the handle change and handle submit will change every time. So this time we're doing API call. Before we were doing a function. So we send everything to a function. So handle submit, basically the job of handle submit is, where do I send the data from this form? That's the job of handle submit. So you could either send it to a form, you could either send it to an API or somewhere else. But the handle change, the job of handle change is to keep track of what's happening in the form. So what is changing? So if a one dot changes, it keeps track of that, and it puts that in this state here, so that you could access it somewhere else. So those are the main things. What's inside them might change, but you definitely need these two all the time when it comes to forms. Any other question? Any clarification? Do you understand what this is doing? This line 34.
Yeah, basically the way I understood is just like the last assignment we did was like you clearing the data from the form.
Yeah, so every time we submit something, if you want
Goes-
to clear the data, then that's what you do. So if I hit submit, then these two are going to be deleted after it gets submitted. So that's what it's doing. And the way it's doing is because we have a variable here which has an empty object, just empty stuff, and that is initial form state, which is right here too. So we're using that. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's take a break, inshallah, and then come back, and then we're gonna do the validation, and then conclude it there, inshallah. 10-minute timer. All right, be back soon. All right. Okay, let's get back to it. Okay. So hopefully you guys can hear me. So we did the form, we did the setup and everything. What's missing now is the validation. We need to do validation because the form now, it doesn't matter what we do, there's no validation whatsoever. There's nothing happening. So we're going to use a package called WEB, YUP, which we can install. And if we look at the WEB here, it says here WEB is a JavaScript schema builder for value parsing and validation. Define a schema. So when you hear a schema, it's just a template. So like you will hear that in the backend in the database. So schema is a template. Define a template. Transform a value to match, validate the shape of an existing value, or both WEB schema or WEB template are extremely expressive and allow modeling complex. So they're advertising themselves here. So we're gonna install it like we did right now. So if you're at your computer, you have to install it this way. So, and then the usage would be we import like this. So let's copy this, go back to here, go up here. So import it like that. And then we will use it this way. So we're gonna build a schema first. So the schema is just the way that the data is gonna look like. So in here, so if I break it down, let me grab my my drawing tool. So as you can see here, we have a name in our state, right? So this is the name. So you give it the form name first, and then you say, is it a string? Is it a number? So you say, yep, a string. And as you can see here, is a object shape. So this is the way it looks like in their application in the yep system. And then you can extend this, and you can say, okay, if you want to add more things, more requirements, you can say dot, and keep in mind that everything is like a function here. So, and then dot required, this means you cannot skip it, you have to fill it in. And then you can keep adding more. As you can see here, this one is a number, this is required dot positive. So the number has to be positive. It has to be an integer. So you could, and this one you can see here, it's a function which says it's a date, and the default is a function which returns new date, which is, the date, the current date. So as you can see here, you can do a lot of things. This one is a website. As you can see here, it's a string, but also you could say a URL. So if you put something else, so let's say you put an email, it will not allow you. It only accepts URL, otherwise it will not work. So this is very powerful, and it helps you keep track of basically your inputs, so you don't miss something and then somebody puts something else and later on you could have like hacking. So, and then there is the validation. So we have to, there's two ways to validate. One is after you submit, then it will say, oh, something is wrong. Another one would be inline. So, and we will see the inline one. So these are different ways to validate. Let's see. And you have a lot of properties. So if we go down, so as you can see here, the string has all these properties that you could connect to. There's a mixed one, there's a number here, there's all these properties. The date has all these ways of changing it. So you have all these types of, we'll say, ways to kind of change your data. So yeah, so let's practice this and kind of like use that to make sure that every time we type here something, it validates that, makes sure it's correct. So let's put it right underneath the handle submit. So this would be yep schema. Okay, so schema is a template. You can say template here. All right, so to do this, we have to give it a variable. So we're going to say const, let's call it form schema. And that will be equal to yup dot object and then dot shape. And inside the shape, we're going to put our validation. So in here, we're going to put our validation. We're going to start with the name. So we have all these things to validate. So let's start with the name, and we could just copy them, right? Just put them here and then get rid of this and then validate each one of them. So name will be yup dot, let's say string, okay? And this will be required, okay? So we could do that. Email, this would be yup dot email. And then we could say what in here, like when it's required, you could say, hey, you know, this is required. So we could say something like name is required. And here in the email, you could say something here too. We say must be a valid email, and we could connect it to required too. So you can see you could like connect things easily. Let me zoom this in. And then here we're going to replace with, this is a string, of course, so it will be yup dot string. Let's connect it to required. And we'll say this one, let's just say y. Position, so let's see position. We'll say position, it's a string. Let's just call it string. Yup dot string. And we're not going to require it. All right. So, and then the last one would be the terms. So this would be a Boolean. So this would be yup dot Boolean. Boolean. So and we could say required to. So this one, we could say please agree on terms, something like that. So in here we could say dot required. Okay. So yeah, so there's different ways to do this. What am I missing here? Required. Did I spell it correctly? Yup dot email. Okay. What is that? What am I missing? Email is not a function. Okay. So, oh, okay. I have to say here string. Because email itself is a string, right? So they all have to be string or a number or something like that. All right. So we have this now. The way to use this is we have to set up a use effect, because remember this is gonna change and it's not gonna be pure. So we don't want something that's not pure. I mean, this you could either make it, you could submit it, or like if it's not required, you can submit it without the data or with the data. There's a lot of things happening. So we could use effect to make sure that first we validate everything, and then after that we allow the person to move forward. If it's not validated, we could give them an error or something like that. So let's do that. Another thing we could do is, before we even do that, is we can validate inline. So we can validate inline. The way to validate inline, it means, for example, while you fill in this, while you're doing that, it will tell you, hey, this is not an email. So before you even finish, it will tell you this is not an email. But this one, when we actually like submit, it will say, you know, it's not an email. I mean, it's still allowing us to do it, so that's not good. because it's a text actually. We can say here email if you want. Anyways, so let's validate inline before we use the use effect. So to validate inline, this is a little bit tricky, so pay attention. So we're going to create a variable. We're going to say validate change. So any change that happens, for example, the handle change, remember the handle change is keeping track of what is changing. This one is keeping track of the validation. If what we typed is what we are looking for, what we actually said here. So if we don't type a name, it will immediately say, hey, you have to type a name. If we don't type an email, it will immediately say type an email. So this would be a function. So we'll say event. And you could call this whatever you want. We could say handle validation, instead of handle change, handle validation change, let's say that. So it handles the changes that happen to the validation. So the first thing we need is we need to grab yup. So we're going to say here yup dot. Yup has a method called reach. So we're going to use that reach. So this will go and grab all the data. So it will compare what you type in to the data that to the schema here. So whatever you type, then it will compare. It will say, hey, let's check if you type in a name. So first we need to give it the schema. So we're gonna say form schema right here. And the next thing we need to give it is the name of the input. So the name of the input would be event.target.name, right? So that would be the name of the input. Okay, so when we do that, then we say the next, so this one is dot reach. So it's good to put in like a new line. There's also dot validate. So dot validate. So this will validate the value, the information that you actually submitted. So this would be event.target.value. So the value we're submitting, it's going to say, hey, let me check that if it's the correct information. And then we'll say, okay, so when all that things happen, we'll say dot then. So remember, this is a promise. So dot then. So after all that, we're going to say valid. We're going to use this name valid. You can name whatever you want. So this means all the data here that we typed is valid and it's in here, right? So it's in here. So valid. Okay, so this will be a callback function. And we're going to give it that. So inside here, we could say, okay, so valid is the valid when you validate it and you know 100% that the data is correct. Then now what you could do is you could set the errors. So we have to set up an error here on this state right here. So right underneath the state, you have to create an error state. So this is where things get a little murky and kind of like complicated. So we have to keep track of the errors too, right? So let's set up an error state here. So we're just going to say error. Let me see, that's how I typed it. Yep. We're going to say errors, and then we're going to say set. In here, we're going to say, so instead of the set errors, we can say set form state, right? Because the errors, if we change something, we're changing the state basically. So we usually don't, when we're doing this, we're only saying, okay, whatever you inputted in the state is not correct. So that's how we're going to keep track. We don't need, no, actually, we're going to say here set errors. Never mind. That'd be easier. I don't want to confuse you guys. So let's say set errors. It's going to be the same, and then we're going to say use state. And here, we're going to set up the initial state. So we're going to use the initial state. Okay. So these errors, this state of error is what's going to keep track of if this form has an error or not. Right. So let's go down all the way. So right here, we're going to say set error. set errors. And we're gonna set it we're gonna copy the state, which is the errors. So copy the state, errors. And then we're gonna say, okay, then we're gonna set the name of the state to nothing, right? So that we know that there's no error. So whatever in here will be empty. And that means it will not show an error. So to do that, we're just gonna say here event.target.name is equal to nothing. So there's no error. But if there's error, then that's a catch, of course. So catch. So catch will grab the error. So error, this would be callback function. And here we're gonna say set error. We're gonna use the state we just created, set errors. We can do the same thing, copy the state. So copy the state. And then the name, we're gonna set it to the error, right? So this would be event.target.name would be the error itself. So we're gonna grab the first error. So this will be the error right here. The first error that comes here. Error.errors. And then we're gonna set the first one. So we'll set it to 0. So the first error, there could be many errors, but we just grabbing the first one. So it could be like here in our schema, we have the string, we have the email unrequired. So if you put something that is not an email, then this will validate. It will say must be an email. But if it's not a string, then this will validate it to start with. So if you put a number there, it will say, oh, that has to be a string. So that's what I mean by the first error, because if you get the first error, then you don't need to worry about the rest. Okay, so this is the validation. It handles all the validation. So how do we actually use this? Let's see. Okay, so how do we use this? So to use this, we have to go down here and give each input an error state. So we could say here right underneath right before the label closing, we could say, okay, check if there's an error. So that will just check the state here, the state we created here. It will check if there's an error. If there's an error, then render that error, right? That's all we're doing right here. Okay, let's do that. And this will be the last part of checking the error. So here we're gonna say errors dot name, okay, dot length. So we're saying if the name, so remember our errors is just basically each error has a name. Each input has a name, and then whenever there's error, that error happens to that name. So this name right here. So if the length of that is more than 0, so that means if there is something there, then we're going to use a ternary operator. Then we're going to say, then grab the name of the error. So we're going to say here, we're going to say error.name. Otherwise, we're going to say otherwise basically nothing. So we're going to say null. So don't show anything otherwise. So let me see if I'm missing something here. Yeah, I'm missing this, but this we're gonna put here some HTML. So let's do that. So we're gonna put some HTML here, add class so that it looks nicer. The class would be error, which I already created. That would be like that, and then here we're gonna close it with P. So this should be errors. Okay, so let's save this. Okay. Let me double check everything is working. Handle change, validate. Okay. So when we're doing the on change, we need to also add this function. So handle change will go to in here, handle change. So the validation, every time we submit something, sorry about this. So every time we have to put it right here, so that every time we do any changes to the input, also that function runs too, right? So we're gonna do this and say event here. Okay. So this is the validation handle. And every time there's some changes, it checks first if that is actually valid. And then after that, it says okay or not. All right, let's test that out. So we only checked, actually, we have to do for all of them. So right here, we're gonna copy this. And we're just gonna change the we're gonna change the name. Let's see. Yeah, we're gonna change the name to motivation or other ones. So right here, we're gonna put this one here and change the name here to email. Right. And then also change this, copy this, put it here, and change this to motivation. Hopefully it works. I'm not sure, 100% sure if it's gonna work. And here, right after the select, we're gonna put the error. We're gonna test it out in a minute and change this to position. And the last one would be the checkbox. So the checkbox, we're gonna put it. So let's keep it off the checkbox for now. So let's check here. So now if we put something that's not an email, it should show the error state here. As you can see here, automatically shows. It's working. So this whole thing we're doing is in inline, like right now we're seeing right now, without you submitting it, before you even submit it, it will say, hey, this is not an email. And as you can see, we kept it empty. And it says this is a required field because we said that here in our schema. This is a required field, not that one, this one. We said required, so that's why it's saying this is a required field. We could also put something here in the required. We could say something like must have an email. Okay. So if we save it and run it, okay. If we type something here and delete it, now it says must be a valid email. But if we delete it, it says must have an email, right? If we type here something, it's okay, it's happy with it. But if we delete it, it will say name is required. So this is very, very powerful when it comes to like front-end validation. So before you even submit anything, before you even get there, you kind of have to validate everything beforehand. So I'm sure this is kind of like, this whole code is kind of confusing. This might be a little less confusing, but any questions, anything that's like, is not making any sense?
Man,
Yeah.
now, you see line 959, which is dot bridge.
Yeah.
So right now, we're using two methods. Is that right?
What do you mean two methods? Right here, the form schema and this one?
One method. The reach only.
Yeah, the reach is part of WEB. So WEB has a method called the reach, and it's grabbing the schema, and it's also checking the name in the schema. So the name could be either name, email, motivation, position. So it could be any of them. So when it says name, it doesn't mean only the first one. It means all of them. Yeah. So it's checking that, it's saying, does that exist? So if that exists, then validate the value of that, validate of the value of the name. So the value would be whatever we input. And then if it's validated, so when it's validated, it says, okay, good. So we have it validated and it's in here. Now set the errors to 0, to nothing. So there will be no error. So if I type here an email, Muhammad@gmail.com, by the time I write .com, it sets the errors to 0. And even if we like console log errors, so if we go up here, console log error, let's see, console log errors, which is the state, like we created a state called errors. Okay, we open this.
It should be empty, right?
It should be empty. Yeah. So errors is an object now, but there's nothing.
No
But
data.
the first thing it says the name is required here. See, because it's already typed written here. If we refresh everything, says there's nothing now. So there's no error. I mean, it's an empty object. But if we type here something, as you can see, it quickly says, okay, the thing that we need is email must be a valid. So it says here, email must be valid. So we have it here. If we leave it empty, it says what's more important now is that there is no email. So we have to put in the error that says must have an email. So error is just like handle change, which is very touchy. And every time you change something, it jumps up and down. So error is like that. And what's making that happen is this function, handle validation change. And we're running this function in handle change right here. We're running it right there. So it's keeping track of everything. Okay, any question, any clarification? And the errors that are shown right here, this one's, I use the CSS to make it look like that. It's usually black. It's right here. So this line, what it's doing is it's checking, first it's checking if there's any errors. So this is checking if there is any error. Anything more than 0 means there is an error. So if there is, if it's more than 0, then it's saying run this. Basically show that error. So render that error. If there's nothing, then it's a null. So null will be nothing. So don't show anything. So it's a JavaScript expression. Hopefully that makes sense. So this validation will help you in the future when you're building something and you want to validate on the front end. There's different ways to validate things. There's also something that I could have taught you guys, but I thought it would be more complicated. It's called Formic, and I talked about this before. Formic is a package like WEB or Axios or something like that. It makes it easy for you to build forms. So when I say it makes it easy, it means it makes it easy to manage. So here it says build forms in React with other tiers. So now here we're doing like handle change, right? We're doing handle submit, and we're writing the whole thing down. We're doing handle change, and we're doing writing the whole thing down. We're doing validation, writing the whole thing down. In Formic, you don't have to write down the whole thing. You could, it comes with the properties. So it has properties like handle change, handle submit. And all you have to do is just say this, give me the handle submit or handle change. So let's type here something. Submit says email, email.com. As you can see, it gives you that data back. This is not a good example of Formic, but yeah, it's a little bit more, the setup of it is a little more complicated than what we did here. But in the long run, like let's say you have a bigger application with like maybe like 20 forms, 100 forms, Formic will come in hand in that sense. But if you're doing something simple of like one form, then doing it your own might be a little bit easier. Any question before we close out? All right, let's go to the assignment. Check it out. So the assignment is a enrollment form. So basically you create your own React, just like we did last time, the team builder. You do the same thing. We want to create a form to enroll new users in our system. We need at least the following pieces of information. So name, email, password, terms of services, submit button. And then after you collect all the information, implement the validation. So make sure it's showing errors, just like we did now. Use post request to send that data to this API. So I gave you the API. So it's the same API I'm using right now. And then display the data. So show the data on the screen. So that would be something. The reason I removed it today is because I want you to try that yourself. So the data that comes from the API, show it in here in the form. So maybe underneath the form or at the top of the form. So that will be your homework. Most of you have the form set up. All you have to do is just copy and then modify it and then add the Axios and things like that. So I think you'll be good. Any question? Okay.
So you're gonna, Mal,
Yeah.
you're gonna display the data in a like a different component too, or
You don't have to show it in a different component. You could if you want. You could show it within the form component if you want. You could show it right underneath the you could create a div and then show it underneath there. So you could create a div here. And we have to give it the opening div here before the form. You can't put it inside the form. You could create, div, and then put it right here. So if you want to put in another component, what you could do is you could show that component here if you like, or you could show it in the app.js. So maybe right underneath the form. So whatever way that works for you. So there's different ways to do it. You could show it directly here. So you could collect the data. So this data right here, this rest. So that would be rest.data here. Rest.data, you could put this in a state and then render that state right here underneath here, if you like. Okay, any other question? All right, try your best, inshallah, to finish. You have 2 days. Also, if you haven't finished the previous assignment, please submit that too as soon as possible. And I'll try, inshallah, to help anyone. So if you are stuck or anything's it's not making sense, let me know. I'll be here most of the time. So, inshallah. Khairat li rijina. Assalamu alaikum.